The dress was ivory, with a long cathedral train and 47 buttons down the back. She'd told me that detail on the phone, breathless, the way my daughter used to sound on Christmas morning. She'd found it at a small boutique 3 towns over and put half down on a Tuesday in March, and she called me from the parking lot, crying the good kind of crying, and I sat in my car in the grocery store lot and cried right along with her. That was 14 months before I found it, hanging in the back of her closet, still in the garment bag, still with the boutique's ribbon tied around the hook, and next to it, not hidden, not even tucked away, just there, the way people leave things when they've stopped believing anyone will ever look, a banker's box, unlabeled, sitting on the closet floor like it had always been there, like it belonged. I want to be honest with you, I almost didn't open it. There is a particular kind of woman, and I was her for a very long time, who senses the edge of something terrible and steps back from it, who decides quietly and without ceremony that not knowing is a form of survival. I had been that woman through a difficult pregnancy, through a mother-in-law who made an art form of casual cruelty, through 17 years of a marriage that asked more of me than it ever returned. But something had shifted in me by then. I can't tell you exactly when it happened. I only know that the woman who stood in that closet on a Wednesday afternoon in January was not the same woman who had cried in a grocery store parking lot 14 months before. She was quieter, stiller, and she had learned, finally, permanently, that the things people don't want you to find are precisely the things you need to see. I opened the box. Inside, 7 years of bank statements from an account I had never heard of, in a bank 3 states away, under a name I recognized, my husband Clifford's mother's maiden name, with a balance that, as of November of that year, sat at $412,000. $412,000. I want you to understand something. We had been planning my daughter Brielle's wedding on a budget of $18,000. Clifford had spent 3 months telling me that $18,000 was already a stretch. He'd suggested she consider a smaller guest list. He'd floated the idea, gently, always gently, the way he did everything, of moving the reception to his cousin's backyard. He had cried, actually cried, when Brielle asked if she could have a live band, and told her that musicians were a luxury they just couldn't justify right now. Right now. While $412,000 sat in an account 3 states away under his mother's name. I stood in that closet for, 4 minutes, maybe 20. Time does something strange when the architecture of your life is rearranging itself around you. I remember the weight of the first statement in my hands. I remember noticing that my breathing had gone very even, very slow, the way it does when some part of you is making a decision the rest of you hasn't caught up to yet. I put the statements back in the box in the exact order I'd found them. I retied the ribbon on the garment bag. I walked downstairs, started dinner, and when Clifford came home at 6:15, I handed him a glass of wine and asked about his day. And that was the last night I was the woman he thought he knew. Because here's what Clifford did not understand about me, what he had perhaps never understood in 22 years of marriage, despite ample evidence. I am not a woman who acts in anger. I am a woman who prepares. And I had spent the better part of 2 decades becoming very, very good at being underestimated. I want you to hold on to that banker's box. Because before this is over, it will end up somewhere Clifford never imagined. And the person who puts it there will be Brielle. But to understand how we got there, to understand how a wedding dress became the first thread in an unraveling that took 8 months and one very thorough forensic accountant, I have to take you back to the beginning. To the year Clifford's mother died and left him, supposedly, nothing. Supposedly. Dorothea, Clifford's mother, died on a Thursday in September, 3 years before I found that box. She was 81 years old, had opinions about everything, and loved Clifford with a particular devotion of a woman who had decided, somewhere around his 7th birthday, that her son could do no wrong. She was not always easy to love, but she was consistent, I will give her that. She had been widowed young. Clifford's father, Gerald, passed when Clifford was 19, and she had spent the 4 decades after that being quietly, methodically self-sufficient, in the way that generation of women sometimes was. She kept her own accounts, she made her own appointments, she did not ask for help, and she did not explain herself, and when she died, she left behind a house that needed work, a storage unit full of furniture, and, according to the estate attorney, very little else. That is what Clifford told me, almost word for word. Very little else. I remember asking, gently, because finances between us were always a conversation I had to enter carefully, whether there might be anything in the estate worth liquidating. Brielle was 10 then. I was thinking about college. I was thinking about the kitchen that still had the original linoleum from 1987. I was thinking about the fact that I had not had a vacation in 4 years. Clifford looked at me the way he sometimes did, not unkindly, but with this particular quality of patience that always made me feel slightly foolish for having asked, and said that his mother had lived simply, that the house would barely cover her debts, and that he hoped I wasn't expecting anything, because expecting things from grief was a habit he'd never been comfortable with. He said that, to me, about his mother's death, as though my question had been an act of vulgarity. And I apologized, because that is what I did then. I apologized for asking reasonable questions in a tone that suggested the questions themselves were the problem. I want to tell you a little about the shape of our marriage, because it matters for what comes later. Clifford was not a loud man. He was not a dramatic man. There were no scenes, no explosions, no moments that would have made sense to describe to a friend over coffee. What there had always been, was this quiet, persistent atmosphere of being slightly wrong, of being someone whose instincts needed calibrating, of being a woman who meant well but needed occasionally to be corrected. He managed our finances, completely, from the beginning, which I had agreed to in our first year because I was 26 and he was 31, and he had a confidence about money that I mistook for competence. By the time I understood the difference, the system was established, and changing it felt like an accusation, so I let it stand. I had a household account he funded monthly. I had a credit card he reviewed. I had, in 22 years of marriage, never once seen a complete picture of what we had or where it went. I told myself this was normal. A lot of women told themselves the same thing in the same years. Some of them are watching this right now. What I did not know, what I could not have known, because the mechanisms of it were so patient, so methodical, so carefully spread across years, was that Dorothea had not died with very little else. Dorothea had died with a great deal else. A life insurance policy in Clifford's name. Savings bonds she had purchased steadily since the 1970s. A brokerage account, modest but real. A second property, a lake lot 2 hours north that Gerald had bought before he died, and that Clifford had quietly sold, privately, 6 months after the funeral. None of it ever came home. All of it went into that account. The one 3 states away. The one under his mother's name. The one that had been growing, quietly and without my knowledge, for 3 years before I stood in that closet on a Wednesday in January and felt the floor shift beneath me. Now, I need you to understand something about forensic accountants, because this becomes important. Most people don't know they exist until they need one. Most people don't know what they can find or how far back they can look. or how a pattern of deposits made over 36 months tells a story just as clearly as a confession. Clifford was a careful man, but careful men make one mistake that undoes everything. They assume the person they've underestimated has stayed underestimated. She hadn't, not for a long time, and the wedding dress hanging in Brielle's closet was about to become the reason he found out. I did not call a lawyer first. I want to be clear about that, because the order in which a woman does things when she discovers something like this matters. It matters practically, and it matters psychologically, and it tells you something about the kind of woman she has become. I called my college roommate, Francesca. Francesca had been divorced for 11 years. She was a paralegal at a family law firm in a city 4 hours away, and she was the only person in my life who had never once made me feel foolish for having a question. I called her from my car, parked 2 streets over from our house, engine running, heat on low. I told her what I'd found. All of it. The account, the statements, the balance, the years. I told her about Dorothea's estate and what Clifford had said about it. I told her about the lake lot. I told her about the kitchen with the 1987 linoleum and the vacation I hadn't taken, and Brielle's wedding budget, and the way he had cried about the live band. Francesca was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life. She said, "Don't touch anything, don't move anything, and don't let him know you know. Not yet." She gave me the name of a forensic accountant, a woman named Odessa who worked independently, billed by the hour, and had spent 15 years prior to private practice working financial crimes for the state. Francesca said, and again I'm quoting, "Odessa finds things that don't exist anymore. If there's more, she'll find it." There was more. I met Odessa on a Tuesday at a coffee shop 40 minutes from our house. I brought photographs of every statement in that box. I had spent a Sunday afternoon while Clifford golfed, photographing each page on my phone, then uploading them to a cloud account he didn't know existed, under an email address I had created at the public library. Methodical, quiet, invisible. I had surprised myself. I had not known I was capable of that kind of stillness. But it turned out that 22 years of being the woman who kept everything running while someone else took credit for the stability had given me an extraordinary capacity for functioning while in pain. I just hadn't ever used it for myself before. Odessa looked at the photographs for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up at me and said, the account was only the beginning. What she needed, she told me, was access to the estate filing. The probate records from Dorothea's death were public. She could pull them herself. She wanted to see what had been declared versus what Clifford had told me. She called me 8 days later. The declared estate had been accurate. Small, modest, exactly what Clifford described. But Odessa had found something the estate filing didn't account for. A transfer. $46,000 moved from a joint account Dorothea held with Clifford 11 days before she died. Moved to a personal account. His personal account. One I had also never seen. 11 days before she died. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I had to. I have to step outside this story for just a second, because if you are watching this right now and something in your chest has gone very still and very tight, I know that feeling. That is the feeling of a pattern becoming visible. That is the feeling of realizing that what you called your life was also, in part, a managed perception. That the person who was supposed to be your partner was also, in some precise and calculated way, your administrator. If you have ever felt that, drop a burning heart emoji in the comments. Not because I need the engagement, because I want you to see how many of you there are. How many women sat exactly where you're sitting, feeling exactly what you're feeling, thinking they were alone in it. You were never alone in it. Not for a single day. Now, back to Odessa and the 11 days, and what I did next, which Clifford, to this day, has described to his attorney as completely out of character. He meant it as an insult. I took it as the finest compliment I have ever received. Because here is what he had never understood about my character. He had only ever seen the parts of it I'd allowed him to manage. The careful wife, the reasonable woman, the one who apologized for asking questions. He had never once seen what I was like when I stopped apologizing. He was about to. Odessa took 6 weeks. I know that sounds like a long time. I know that because I lived inside those 6 weeks the way you live inside a waiting room. The particular suspended quality of days when you know something is coming, and the only thing between you and it is time. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I sat across from Clifford at a table we had bought together 19 years ago at an estate sale, and I watched him eat and talk and pour himself a second glass of wine. And I thought about the 11 days. I thought about Dorothea, who had loved him so completely she had never once asked him a hard question. I thought about what it costs a woman to love someone who has decided, somewhere along the way, that her trust is a resource to be managed rather than a gift to be honored. I did not hate him yet. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something colder and more clarifying than hate. I felt the particular grief of a woman who has finally understood the full dimensions of a room she has been living in for decades. Not the heat of betrayal, the chill of comprehension. During those 6 weeks, I did 3 things. First, I opened my own account. A small credit union 40 minutes away, the kind of place with a parking lot and a handshake, and no digital footprint that connected to anything Clifford monitored. I moved money into it slowly. Birthday gift money I hadn't spent. The cash I kept in an envelope for household emergencies. Nothing dramatic, nothing traceable as a pattern, just enough to begin. Second, I called the boutique 3 towns over, the one with the ivory dress and the 47 buttons. I introduced myself as Brielle's mother. I explained that we might need to revisit the budget conversation and asked whether they had worked with families navigating, I chose the word carefully, transitions. The woman I spoke to, a soft-voiced woman named Helen, said yes. She said it more gently than I expected, and I understood that she had had this conversation before. That I was not the first mother who had called from a car, voice steady, needing to know that the dress would still be there. She said the dress would still be there. Third, and this is the one that matters, I told Brielle. Not everything, not yet. Brielle was 26 and newly engaged, and I was not willing to take a wrecking ball to her world before I had something solid enough to build with afterward. But I told her enough. I sat with her at her kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon while her fiancé Wade was at work, and I told her that I had found something in her closet that concerned me, and that I was looking into it, and that when I knew more I would tell her everything, and that in the meantime I needed her to do one thing. I needed her to stop discussing the wedding budget with her father. Brielle looked at me for a long moment. She has her grandfather Gerald's eyes, dark and still and very direct. And she said, "Mom, how long have you known something was wrong?" I told her I wasn't sure, that I thought, maybe, I had known something was wrong for a very long time, but that knowing something is wrong and being able to name it are 2 different skills, and I had only just learned the second one. She reached across the table and took my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We sat there for a while in her kitchen, with the afternoon coming through the window, and I remember thinking this very clearly. This is what I am doing it for. Not the money, not the justice. This exact moment, which she deserves to have without a lie underneath it. Odessa called on a Wednesday morning. The total, across all concealed accounts, the lake lot sale, the redirected inheritance, and what she had identified as a pattern of fraudulent transfers going back, not 3 years, but 9, was $1,240,000. $1,240,000. Hidden across 9 years of a marriage. 9 years of reasonable explanations and managed budgets, and a kitchen with 1987 linoleum, and a daughter who'd been asked to think carefully about whether she really needed a live band at her wedding. I wrote the number down on a piece of paper. I looked at it for a moment. Then I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, and called the family law attorney Francesca had recommended 3 weeks earlier. Her name was Valentina, and she had, Francesca told me, never once lost a financial concealment case. Clifford was about to meet the version of me he had spent 22 years making sure would never exist. She existed. She had been there the whole time, just waiting for the number. Valentina was 53 years old, wore her silver hair short, and had an office that smelled like cedar and old paper, and something I can only describe as competence. She did not waste time. She did not offer me tea. She sat across from me, opened a legal pad, and said, "Tell me everything, in order, starting with the first moment something felt wrong. Not the first moment you had proof. The first moment something felt wrong." I told her about the estate, about the lake lot, about the household account and the credit card, and the 19 years of never seeing a complete financial picture. I told her about the banker's box and Odessa and the number on the folded piece of paper. I put Odessa's full report on her desk, 41 pages, tabbed and dated, with every transfer mapped and every account documented. Valentina read for 11 minutes without speaking. I know because I watched the clock on her wall. Then she looked up and said, "This is not a divorce case. This is a fraud case that will also produce a divorce." She explained what that meant in practical terms. It meant that the concealed assets were not subject to standard division. It meant that Clifford's pattern of transfers, particularly the ones in the 11 days before Dorothea died, constituted a potentially criminal act, separate from the civil proceedings entirely. It meant that we would be filing in a way that froze the accounts before he had any opportunity to move the money again. Freeze first, notify second. I want you to understand what that means. It means that on the morning Clifford found out his wife knew, the morning everything changed, he would wake up to find that the money was already unreachable, that the window he would have used to protect himself had already closed, that the woman he had spent 22 years underestimating had, with the help of a forensic accountant and a very good attorney, dismantled his entire architecture of concealment before he had even been told it was visible. Valentina called it a simultaneous disclosure. I called it a Wednesday. There is something I want to tell you about the weeks between that meeting and the filing date, because they were some of the strangest weeks of my life. I was still making dinner, still asking about his day, still sitting across from Clifford at the estate sale table and watching him pour his second glass of wine. But something had shifted in the quality of my stillness. It was no longer the stillness of a woman holding herself together. It was the stillness of a woman who knows exactly what is coming and has made her peace with it. I grieved during those weeks. I want to be honest about that, because I think there is sometimes a story told about women in my position, that the discovery of betrayal produces only fury, only certainty, only the clean momentum of righteous action. And there is fury, and there is certainty, but there is also grief. For the marriage you thought you had, for the version of your life you had believed in, for the particular exhausting sadness of being right about something you had desperately wanted to be wrong about. I grieved it, privately, completely, and then I set it down. Brielle knew the filing date before Clifford did. I had told her 3 days prior, everything this time, all of it, the full number and the full picture and the full 9 years. She had sat with it quietly for a long moment, and then she had said, "The wedding dress is paid off. I used the money Grandma Dorothea left me directly. The account she set up for me when I was 7. Dad didn't know about it." I stared at her. Dorothea had opened a savings account for Brielle when she was 7 years old? Had funded it quietly, consistently, for the rest of her life. Had told no one, not Clifford, not me, not the estate attorney, because she had addressed it directly to Brielle in a separate letter, delivered through the bank upon her death. $46,000, untouched, waiting. The woman who had loved Clifford so completely she never asked him a hard question, had seen him clearly enough to protect her granddaughter from him. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about all the ways women protect each other. Quietly, indirectly, across generations, in ways that don't announce themselves until the moment they're needed. Dorothea had not known what Clifford was doing, but she had known something, and she had acted on it the only way she could. The dress was already paid for. It had always been paid for. The filing date was a Thursday, and Clifford, precise, careful, methodical Clifford, had a standing golf game on Thursday mornings. He would come home to a different world than the one he'd left. He came home at 12:40. I know because I was not there to see it, and that was entirely intentional. I was at Francesca's, 4 hours away, sitting in her kitchen with a cup of coffee and my phone face up on the table. Valentina had told me to be somewhere I could be reached, but somewhere I did not have to witness the initial moment. She said it with the particular authority of a woman who had seen what that initial moment could look like, and I had taken her advice without question. Clifford walked into a house where the locks had been changed that morning by a locksmith Valentina had arranged. Taped to the front door was a legal notice, the filing, the freeze, the formal notification that proceedings had begun. His key did not work. His phone, when he called the bank, reached an automated system that informed him his access to 3 accounts had been suspended pending a court review. He called me 4 times in 11 minutes. I watched the phone light up and did not answer. Valentina had been very clear. All communication through counsel, effective immediately. I was not to engage directly. I was not to explain. I was not to offer him the courtesy of a conversation he had forfeited 9 years ago when he made his first quiet transfer into an account 3 states away. I let it ring. There is a particular kind of freedom in that, in watching a phone ring and feeling, not cruelty, not satisfaction exactly, but something simpler and more profound. The freedom of a woman who has finally stopped managing someone else's comfort at the expense of her own survival. It does not feel the way you expect it to. It does not feel triumphant. It feels like setting down something very heavy that you had forgotten you were carrying. It feels like breathing normally for the first time in years. The proceedings took 8 months. I will not walk you through every document, every deposition, every moment in a conference room where Clifford's attorney tried variations of the same argument. That the accounts were private savings, that the transfers were estate management decisions, that I had been a full partner in our financial arrangement and therefore bore some responsibility for its shape. A full partner. In an arrangement I had never once been shown in its entirety. Valentina did not raise her voice in response to this. She placed Odessa's 41-page report on the conference table, opened it to the summary page, and read the total figure aloud into the record. Then she placed, beside it, a single document, the estate filing from Dorothea's death, with the declared assets listed, and next to it, Odessa's findings of what had been declared versus what had been moved in the 11 days prior. She let the silence do the rest. The settlement was not everything. I want to be honest about that, because I think the stories we tell about justice sometimes imply a completeness that real life does not always provide. Clifford's attorney was competent. Some of the transfers were old enough that recovery was partial rather than full. There were legal fees. There were months of my life that cost something I cannot put a dollar amount on. But here's what the settlement was. It was the house, free and clear. It was 60% of the total identified assets, recovered, transferred, mine. It was a college fund for any future grandchildren, written into the agreement at Brielle's quiet, fierce insistence. It was the 1987 linoleum, finally replaced. I did that myself, 3 weeks after the ink dried, with Brielle and Wade and Francesca all there, pulling it up together on a Saturday morning, laughing at how much was underneath it. And it was a wedding. Not $18,000 in a backyard. A real wedding, in the venue Brielle had originally wanted, with a guest list that was not trimmed for budget, and flowers she had not talked herself out of. And a band, a live band, a very good one, that played until 11 o'clock on a Saturday night in June, while I sat at a table with Francesca and Odessa and Valentina and watched my daughter dance. Clifford was not there. That was not a loss. That was the point. I thought about Dorothea that night, about the account she had quietly built for Brielle across 19 years, about the way she had loved her granddaughter in the particular language of a woman who understood that love, to be real, sometimes has to be structural, has to be something you can hold, something that survives. The dress had 47 buttons. Wade did every single one. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If any part of this story reminded you of something you've lived through, the managed budget, the reasonable explanations, the years of being the woman who kept everything running while someone else kept the books, I see you. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. Some arrangements are built specifically so that you can't see them clearly until you finally decide to look. And when you look all the way. If this one found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, well, you've watched Clifford walk into a locked house. You know we don't do things halfway around here. She didn't win by fighting louder. She won by knowing more. Remember that. I'll see you by the fire.